in the quiet mountain village of Valgrande, where every dawn smelled of cold pine and wet stone, lived a woman the world would one day whisper about, but almost no one truly knew. Her name was Alina Markovic, a seamstress by trade, the kind of person who could walk through a crowded marketplace without a single head turning. She was ordinary in every visible way. She stitched clothes, carried bread from the old bakery, cared for her mother, and kept her eyes lowered when German patrols marched past the village square. But beneath that quiet surface lived a mind sharper than steel. Valgrande lay deep inside occupied territory, trapped under the heavy boot of Nazi control. Ammunition lines cut through the mountains, soldiers combed the forests, and anyone suspected of helping the resistance disappeared by nightfall. Fear ate the village from the inside. People spoke quietly. Doors stayed locked. Hope survived only in small, fragile pockets. Alina was one of those pockets. She began passing small scraps of information to resistance messengers. Nothing dramatic, just tiny details she overheard while sewing torn German uniforms, the number of trucks arriving next week, the name of a new officer, the pattern of patrol shifts. Her shop gave her access to soldiers who never imagined she was listening. They treated her like air silent, harmless, invisible. But she wasn't invisible. Every detail she heard, she remembered. Every pattern she mapped. And every movement of the German convoy routes she stored in her mind like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The resistance fighters soon learned that Alina's observations were more accurate than any spy they had. She could recall the noise of a truck engine and tell whether it carried fuel, ammunition, or soldiers. She could listen to a soldier's careless complaint and know which road would be unguarded the next morning. Her intelligence didn't come from weapons or training, it came from watching, listening, and thinking, and that made her dangerous. The Nazis, however, didn't know her face. Not yet, but they had begun hearing rumors. Someone is leaking our movements. Someone knows our convoy routes. Exactly. Someone is helping the mountain fighters. Patrols doubled. House searches increased. Civilians were questioned. But Alina remained a ghost, soft-spoken, unremarkable, and perfectly ordinary. What set her apart wasn't just intelligence. It was fearlessness. She walked past armed checkpoints with a calmness that made even resistance leaders uneasy. She entered German camps under the pretense of delivering mended clothes and memorized guard positions without blinking. And at night, she wandered the cliffs alone. Studying the mountain paths the way generals studied maps, she understood something no one else saw. Steeper than it looked, narrower than it seemed, deadlier than the Germans realized. And Alina knew the day was coming when she would use it. She had already become a threat. The Nazis just didn't know it yet. To the Nazis, it was just another supply line. To the resistance, it was a monster with 5 steel heads each, one capable of burning entire towns to ash. They called the convoy Cerberus III, named after the 3-headed hound of the underworld. But this version had 5 trucks, each one deadly in its own way, each one essential to the German war machine tightening its chokehold on the mountains. The first truck was the command unit. Painted in dull gray, armored plates welded crudely along its sides. It carried not only the officers but also the detailed maps of upcoming offensives. It was the brain of the convoy. Without it, the rest were blind. The second truck was packed with 7.92 mm Mauser rifle ammunition, stacked like bricks of death from floor to roof, enough rounds to arm a battalion for weeks, enough to crush any remaining resistance pocket that dared raise its head. The third truck carried the truly dangerous cargo. Artillery shells heavy, unstable, and powerful enough to crack open hillside bunkers. A single spark could turn the whole truck into a fireball. Even the German drivers avoided smoking near it. Truck 4 was filled with anti-tank mines and high explosive charges, destined to trap Allied vehicles advancing through the region. If these mines reached the front lines, dozens of tanks would never return. And the fifth truck, that one carried the darkness no one talked about openly. Crates stamped with red SS markings. Rumors whispered of chemical rounds, experimental, illegal, never acknowledged. Even the soldiers escorting the convoy avoided asking questions. These 5 trucks were a rolling apocalypse. Their mission was clear: reach the eastern ridge and resupply the German 12th Mountain Division before the Allied breakthrough. If the convoy made it, German forces would regain enough firepower to hold the mountains for months. The resistance would be crushed. the Allies would be delayed. The war in this region would drown in smoke and blood. But if Cerberus III was destroyed, the entire German supply network would collapse like a dying lung dot. No artillery, no rifle ammunition, no mines, no special rounds, no reinforcements, just silence and opportunity. That was why the convoy was guarded by two armed vehicles at the front and rear, machine guns mounted high, scanning every shadow and turn. The mountain pass they traveled, the Devil's Spine, was one of the most dangerous roads in Europe. But they had no choice. Speed meant survival. And the narrow pass was the fastest route to the front lines. The Germans believed no one would dare attack 5 ammunition trucks on such a road. One wrong move would kill everyone, attacker and defender alike. It was the perfect shield. But high in the mountains, a woman watched their movements. A woman the Germans didn't fear. A woman they didn't even know existed. A woman who understood that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you don't see. And Cerberus III was driving straight into her world. The road the Germans trusted so blindly was a place locals spoke of with caution and old superstition. The Devil's Spine, a mountain pass carved into sheer rock, was less a road and more a dare made by nature. It clung to the cliffside like a ribbon pulled too tight, barely wide enough for a single truck to pass without scraping the stone. On one side, jagged rock walls rose like the ribs of a giant beast. On the other, a bottomless drop vanished into fog so thick it seemed alive. Travelers said the cliffs swallowed sound. Drivers said even strong men grew weak on its curves. Every turn was a blind bend. Every bend was a gamble. And every gamble came with a long, silent fall. For the Nazis, it was the fastest route between supply camps. For everyone else, it was a coffin trail. The pass offered something no battlefield ever could: absolute vulnerability. A single stalled truck could block the entire route. A single wrong turn could wipe out a whole convoy. And a single spark, just one could ignite fuel, shells, and explosives in seconds. That made it the perfect trap, and also the most impossible one. Alina Markovic knew this better than anyone. She had walked every inch of the pass, in daylight and in moonlight, in freezing wind and in rain, sharp as needles. She studied how the gravel shifted under weight where loose stones gathered, how the air sounded when trucks climbed the incline. She memorized the echo of engines, the timing of patrols, the average speed of a German convoy, and even which sections of the pass were invisible from below. The mountain was brutal. It cut skin, bruised shins, froze fingertips, and breathed cold air into her lungs until she could barely speak. But she kept returning, because somewhere between those cliffs and curves, she began seeing what no one else had seen: a pattern. The Nazis moved in predictable rhythms. Convoys always entered the pass at dawn, or near dusk, never at noon, when the sun blinded drivers, never at night, when the road was too dark, never during storms when the risk was too high. They moved like clockwork, almost arrogant in their routine. Alina also noted something crucial. The convoy always slowed at the same place, narrow S-shaped curve where drivers hugged the inner wall to avoid the drop. It was the only moment the trucks lost speed. The only moment they bunched together, the only moment where fate tightened its grip. And that was when the first thought struck her. Not a full plan, just a spark, a rope, a simple, stupid rope. At first, the idea felt absurd. How could something so small challenge something as monstrous as Cerberus? But the mountain whispered otherwise. The road was too narrow, the drop too deep, the trucks too heavy. A well-timed disruption could start a chain reaction that physics, not soldiers, would complete as days turned to weeks. The spark became a sketch. The sketch became a plan. And the plan became something dangerously real. The mountain had offered her a weapon. All she had to do was pull. The idea came to Alina like a whisper, almost by accident. She had been climbing the cliffs with her goats, hauling timber and feed across precarious ledges, when her mind wandered to the unstoppable German convoy, 5 trucks, 3 tons of explosives each, barreling past her home every morning. Soldiers smirking at the mountain, trusting the fragile gravel edges. And then she thought, what if the mountain itself could strike back? A rope dot, it sounded ridiculous when she first spoke it aloud. The villagers laughed. You want to take down the Nazis with a rope? An old shepherd asked, shaking his head. The resistance fighters, seasoned and battle-hardened, rolled their eyes. They had bombs, ambushes, and machine guns. They had strategy, courage, and courage tested in fire. And yet here was Alina, a goat herder, suggesting she could destroy a convoy with nothing but hemp, a boulder, and gravity. Stupid, they said. Impossible, they said. But Alina had something they didn't: time and observation. She spent hours studying the road from high perches, hidden behind rock faces, noting the speed of the trucks, the spacing between them, and the exact moment when each driver slowed. Then she began experimenting. Not with trucks, they were too far away, but with smaller weights, rocks, logs, anything she could safely drop to measure timing, distance, and impact. Her first attempts failed miserably. Rocks rolled too slowly and missed the intended spot. Ropes snapped under their own tension. She was bruised, scraped, and soaked with sweat, and yet the spark in her mind never died. Every failure became a lesson. She learned how friction worked against the pull, how leverage could multiply strength, and how the right anchor points could hold enormous weight. She practiced knots that tightened under pressure but would not slip. She tested every configuration she could imagine, over and over, until her fingers bled and her hands ached. The rope that had seemed so simple now had rules, rhythms, and secrets only she understood. She mapped out a multi-stage trigger in her head: one rope to pull another, one tree to snap another, a boulder to fall in perfect alignment. It was insane. It was elegant. It was deadly. The ridicule from others hardened her resolve. Each laugh was fuel. Every skeptical gaze reminded her that the world underestimated her just as the Nazis did every day. She didn't need permission. She didn't need applause. She needed precision. She needed courage. She needed silence. By the end of the third week, she had refined her plan. She could visualize every second of the convoy's approach, every heartbeat of the truck drivers, every inch of the drop. It wasn't a weapon in the conventional sense. It was a trap, designed not to fight, but to exploit the arrogance of men. Thought the road and their machines were invincible, Alina knew she was about to attempt something that would have seemed impossible even to the bravest soldier, but she also knew this. Sometimes, the simplest tools, wielded with intelligence and patience, could accomplish what armies could not. The rope was ready. Her hands were ready. The mountain was ready, and in the quiet hours before dawn, Alina would test her plan not on a goat, not on a log, but on the first Nazi truck of CERBER US-3. Alina began her ascent long before dawn, when the mountain was nothing more than a black silhouette and the wind whispered warnings through the trees. Every step was planned, every movement rehearsed. Today was no longer a test. Today was the ambush. She carried 3 coils of rope thick, weather-worn, and soaked overnight to increase their weight and tension, along with a rusted climbing hook and a small hammer wrapped in cloth to silence the noise. Her goal was simple. In theory, impossible in practice. Position each rope at key anchor points so perfectly that a single pull would unleash a catastrophic chain reaction. The first rope was anchored to an old pine tree perched dangerously at the cliff's edge. She looped the rope 3 times around the trunk, then threaded its end through a narrow gap between 2 boulders. This line was the primary trigger, the one she would pull at the exact moment the lead Nazi truck reached the S-curve. The tension would snap the supporting branch, which would fall directly in front of the truck's wheels, forcing it to swerve. The second rope was more complicated. It stretched across the cliff face like a hidden tripwire. Held in place by a wedge of rock Alina had hammered into a natural crack earlier that week. This rope was designed to tighten only after the first had been pulled. When the branch fell, its weight would jerk the second rope upward, wedging it under the truck's undercarriage. At that speed, even the slightest lift could send the truck sliding toward the cliff edge. The third rope, the most dangerous, was positioned directly above the convoy path. She had strapped it to a boulder the size of a bull, securing it with a knot that would hold only until the exact tension was reached. When released, the boulder would roll just enough to block the second truck. Not crush it, not destroy it, just stop it. Because a blocked second truck meant the trucks behind it would collide. And with their explosive cargo, collision meant annihilation. The entire system relied on physics, not luck. Weight distribution, tension angles, gravity, momentum, and the arrogance of a convoy that believed. itself untouchable. But physics didn't protect Alina from danger. German patrols roamed the pass unpredictably. Twice she had to freeze against the cliff wall, heart pounding so hard she feared they would hear it. Once, a soldier paused only a few steps from her hiding spot to light a cigarette. Smoke curled around her boots, but he never looked down. By the time the sun began to rise, her ropes were in place. The mountain was armed. Now she needed timing. She crouched behind a rock ledge and waited, watching the valley below. Like every morning, the distant hum of engines began as a faint vibration beneath her feet. She checked her pocket watch, synchronized perfectly with the convoy's usual schedule. They were right on time. As the trucks approached the S-curve, Alina positioned her hands on the primary rope. Her palms were sweating, her breath shallow. The world narrowed to a single moment. Down below, 5 trucks filled with enough explosives to shred the mountain rolled toward her trap. Alina whispered a single word to herself. Now, and she pulled. Dawn broke over the jagged peaks, painting the cold stone with a pale golden light. The valley below was still cloaked in mist, the kind that swallowed sound and made distant engines seem ghostly. Alina crouched behind her ledge, every muscle coiled like a spring. Her hands hovered over the ropes, knuckles white, ready to strike the moment physics demanded. Then it came. First, a faint rumble, low and persistent, shaking the ground underfoot. A diesel engine, barely audible at first, then louder, throbbing through the valley like a heartbeat. She felt it through the soles of her boots, a vibration crawling up her spine. The convoy was on schedule. The lead truck, massive and angular, emerged from the fog. Its headlights cut through the mist, glinting off the steel sides. Inside, the driver hunched over the wheel, eyes squinting against the glare. Radio chatter crackled through the cabin. Routine check-ins, confirmations, warnings to slow on sharp curves. Guards leaned against doors, rifles slung carelessly over shoulders, some nodding to music, blaring faintly over the engine hum. Arrogance, complacency, exactly what Alina had counted on. A rolling warehouse of artillery shells, 3 tons of lethal cargo packed tight. Its engine grumbled, tires crunching on the gravel berm she had studied for weeks. It hugged the edge of the cliff as if it owned it. Guards leaned against the doorframes, chatting, unaware of the shadow above. The convoy moved slowly, methodically, a serpent of steel winding through a razor-thin canyon. Alina's pulse quickened. The ropes were taut, the boulder balanced perfectly, the branch ready to snap. She felt the vibrations from the trucks, measured in her hands, felt the mountain's subtle shudder as each tire crushed gravel. Every detail mattered. A fraction of a second too early, and the trap could fail. A fraction too late, and she could die. The third truck, loaded with mortar rounds, followed closely, its horn blaring briefly as it rounded a blind corner. Alina flinched, imagining the devastation if it moved even a foot faster. The fourth and fifth trucks were still hidden in the mist, their massive forms only suggested by the low hum of engines. Time slowed. Alina's ears tuned to every sound, the clink of chains, the faint murmur of German commands over the radio, the soft whistle of the wind threading through the gorge. Her body was rigid, poised for the exact moment. The S-curve was approaching the critical point, where the first rope would unleash the first domino. She checked her watch. The convoy was on schedule to the second. Her plan, honed for weeks, was about to collide with reality. She could see it, all the lead truck's tires brushing the gravel berm, the second truck's headlights piercing the mist, the oblivious guards chatting about weather. Lunch, the boredom of routine, Alina inhaled, tasting the cold mountain air, feeling her hands grip the hemp rope. This was it. The moment that could erase 5 trucks, destroy their ammunition, and change the course of a small part of history. She whispered one word, barely audible to herself. Now, and with that, she set the first stage of her trap in motion, the mountain waiting like a silent accomplice. Alina's fingers burned around the hemp rope, knuckles white, veins bulging. The moment had come. She took a deep breath, feeling the mountain beneath her like a coiled giant. Every stone, every ledge, ready to obey her command. Then she pulled. The rope stretched, groaning under the strain, the fibers screaming as if warning of the chaos to come. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Time froze, and then a snap, a sound like a whip cutting through the dawn, followed by the sharp crack of the dead pine giving way, Above the pass, the boulder shifted. It slid and twisted, picking up speed as gravity claimed it. Elena's heart thudded, every nerve taut. The granite rock struck the gravel berm, the only thing the truck drivers trusted to keep them safe, and the ground seemed to vanish beneath the tires of the second truck. The driver barely had time to react. His front wheel found only air. The massive Opel Blitz tilted precariously, teetering on the edge like a pendulum suspended over a chasm. Guards screamed, shoving at one another, rifles clattering to the gravel. But there was no saving it. Gravity took its due. The truck plunged into the abyss, artillery shells bouncing and rattling inside like a drum of death. Seconds later, the first explosion erupted. A thunderous roar ripped through the gorge, fire and smoke belching skyward, illuminating the pass like a new sun. The shockwave slammed against the cliff face, sending dust and loose stones tumbling. Elena was pressed flat against the rock, wind and heat whipping her hair, the force shaking her to her core. Behind it, chaos unfolded like dominoes. The third truck, caught off guard by the sudden collapse, smashed into the fourth. Metal tore against metal, sparks flying as their cargo of mortars and ammunition cooked off in a symphony of destruction. The fourth and fifth trucks collided into the wreckage, flames licking steel and splintered wood. Each detonation echoed, a wall of fire racing down the ravine, consuming everything in its path. The shockwave tore at Elena, her ears ringing, her body flattened against stone. Smoke and the scent of burning fuel filled the gorge. From her perch, she could see it all, the ravine. Now a pit of fire and twisted metal, the pass itself reduced to rubble. Loose stones tumbled from cliffs above, shaken by the force, creating an avalanche of destruction that would make the Germans think the mountain itself had rebelled. Yet amid the chaos, Elena remained unseen. She watched silently, her hands raw, her hair singed by the heat. The convoy that had terrorized the valley for months, the trucks brimming with shells and explosives, destined for the front, had been annihilated in less than 10 seconds. The mountain was silent again. Save for the hissing of burning metal and the groan of cooling artillery shells, smoke rose like a monument to her ingenuity, and in that brief, impossible moment, one woman had rewritten the rules of war. Elena exhaled, barely moving, absorbing the sight of the devastation she had wrought. She did not cheer. She did not smile. She simply disappeared into the shadowed paths of the gorge, leaving behind a scene of absolute chaos, a testament to strategy, patience, and human cunning. The roar of the explosions faded, leaving a silence so heavy it felt alive. Smoke curled up from the ravine in thick black tendrils, twisting around the jagged cliffs like fingers of some vengeful spirit. Flames licked the twisted metal of the trucks, their cargo of shells and mortars continuing to cook off in a relentless chain of detonation. Rocks rained down from above, dislodged by the shockwave, bouncing into the gorge, smashing against the cliff walls, and filling the air with a cloud of dust and ash. Surviving Nazi soldiers froze in utter disbelief. Guards clutched rifles that were useless against the sheer destruction before them. Drivers, those who had miraculously kept some distance, scrambled to assess what had happened, shouting orders that no one could hear over the residual crackling of burning fuel and the distant echoes of artillery shells exploding in the gorge. Their disciplined formation had been obliterated in seconds. Panic spread faster than any organized retreat. Elena, high above, in her hidden cave, allowed herself a momentary exhale. Her hands throbbed with pain, rope burns screaming every time she flexed her fingers. But she had no time to linger. She began her descent down the cliffside using the hidden paths she alone knew. Every foothold was familiar, every loose stone memorized. The mountain itself became her ally, masking her presence from the frantic eyes below. Below, the valley had descended into chaos. Radio operators fumbled over their headsets, attempting to call for backup, but their voices were drowned by static and the sound of uncontrolled fires consuming metal and timber. The 15th Army's logistics network, meticulously maintained for months, had been shattered in mere seconds. Each panicked transmission only reinforced the belief that nature had turned against them. Soldiers who tried to reach the edge of the gorge stumbled, slipping on the gravel, eyes wide as they peered into the abyss where 5 trucks had vanished. Smoke and fire distorted the landscape, and in the morning light, the devastation looked almost unnatural, like a hand of God had torn a swath through the pass. Alina moved carefully, descending past ridges and outcroppings, avoiding the paths that soldiers were likely to follow. She was invisible, a ghost among the rocks, leaving no trace. Every scream from below, every shout of confusion, every thud of falling debris reminded her that she had just pulled off the impossible. By the time the first German reinforcements arrived, the Col du Diable looked untouched from a distance, the hidden chaos obscured by smoke and dust. Officers searched for hours, checking every ledge, every boulder, every cliff face, but the woman who had orchestrated the destruction was already gone, leaving behind only the silence of the mountains, the ruin of the convoy, and the echo of a feat they would never understand. The mountain had returned to its stillness, indifferent and eternal, but the valley below knew something had changed. A single act of ingenuity, courage, and patience had turned the tides in a place where no strategy, no army, no weapon could have succeeded. And Alina vanished into the folds of the cliffs, the ghostly heroine of a silent, unstoppable mountain. By mid-morning, the first Nazi investigators arrived at the edge of the Col du Diable, faces pale beneath their helmets. Major Karl Brandt, head of the engineering corps, surveyed the wreckage with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Smoke still rose from the ravine, curling over the cliffs, carrying the acrid scent of burnt metal and gunpowder. 5 trucks, each loaded with artillery shells, had vanished, or more accurately, had fallen into the abyss in perfect, impossible timing. The surviving drivers stammered their accounts. Their voices trembled as they described the gap in the road, the sensation of air beneath the wheels, the chaos that followed. I braked. But there was nothing, one whispered, staring into the gorge as if the earth itself had swallowed his comrades. The reports were contradictory, confusing, and utterly implausible. No bomb, no ambush, no partisan attack seemed to fit the facts. Brandt examined the remnants: shattered rocks, twisted metal, and a section of broken pine embedded with a single fiber of hemp rope. He knelt, tracing the fracture with gloved hands, his mind a calculating machine trying to reconcile physics with fantasy. A bomb would have left a crater. Explosives would scatter debris predictably. Yet here was a slice of destruction so precise it looked almost deliberate, almost intelligent. His investigators murmured theories of geological instability, a freak avalanche, even sabotage, but none could explain the perfection of timing. The exact collapse of the road, meanwhile, in the villages below, whispers began. The people who had witnessed the chaos from a distance, farmers, goat herders, children perched on cliffs, started to spread stories of a ghostly figure, a woman who had tamed the mountain itself. They spoke in hushed tones about how she had climbed the cliffs, handled ropes with supernatural skill, and struck the Nazis with a single impossible trick. Every retelling added layers of awe and legend. Some said she was half myth, half mountain spirit. Others insisted she was a mortal woman who had simply understood the arrogance of men and the language of stone. By nightfall, the legend had taken root. Major Brandt, despite his meticulous investigation, could find no evidence of explosives, no partisan presence, no clues beyond the splintered pine and the faint fiber of rope. He began reviewing civilian records, searching for anyone capable of such an act. His focus narrowed: a local, someone invisible, underestimated, the kind the Reich never notices. Yet even with his scrutiny, the saboteur remained a shadow. The story spread quietly. The locals celebrated in secret, leaving small tokens on the mountain paths, murmuring prayers for the invisible heroine. She became more than a person. She was a symbol, a whisper of resistance that no army could fully capture. Her deed, small yet monumental, defied understanding, turning a simple rope and a boulder into a weapon that redefined the impossible. Decades later, historians would stumble across fragments of Brandt's private notes, references to the broken pine, the mysterious fiber, and a girl with hands raw from rope burns. Official reports mentioned only geological instability and partisan sabotage, but the people in the valleys, the keepers of oral history, would remember her true name in silence. A woman, a rope, and a mountain had rewritten history in 10 seconds. The legend of the Col du Diable saboteur was born. The destruction of the 5 Nazi trucks was not just a moment of chaos, it was a turning point. The 15th Army, counting on those shells and mortar rounds for the Atlantic Wall defenses, was suddenly crippled. Artillery positions in Normandy meant to barrage the incoming Allied forces were left dangerously understocked, forcing commanders to improvise and reroute supplies over 200 kilometers away. Hours that should have been filled with calculated destruction were lost. A simple, precise act on a mountain pass had altered the flow of history. News of the incident, filtered through bureaucratic reports and wartime propaganda, credited the Machi, the organized French resistance. Yet those who had witnessed the event in secret knew the truth. A single, fearless woman had exploited the arrogance of men, the laws of physics, and the mountain itself to outsmart an army. Her audacity inspired whispers among villagers and local resistance fighters. They began to believe that the seemingly impossible striking fear into the achieving victories without guns or explosives was within reach. Her life after the event became as invisible as her attack. Elodiro vanished into the high mountains, following the goat paths that only she and the animals knew. She avoided the villages, slipping past patrols and search parties, leaving behind no evidence of her identity. To the Germans, she remained a phantom. To history, she was unrecorded. Yet for those who remembered, she was immortal, a symbol of cunning, courage, and defiance. Major Brandt, haunted by the impossibility of the attack, carried the memory of those rope burns for years. In private notes, he acknowledged that logic, engineering, and brute force had been defeated by ingenuity and simplicity, even as the war raged on and millions of soldiers fought with machines and strategy. One woman had demonstrated that the smallest, quietest acts could have monumental consequences decades later. Historians, piecing together German archives and survivor accounts, would stumble upon traces of her story. Official records remained silent. Her name did not appear in textbooks. Yet the legend endured, whispered among mountain villages, repeated in stories of bravery, and celebrated as a lesson in human ingenuity. The Col Diablo, once a cursed pass of death, became a monument to an invisible hero. Wars are often remembered for grand strategies, generals, and armies. But sometimes, history hinges on the moment a single person sees a flaw, trusts their instincts, and dares to act. Elodiro did not fight the machine of war with explosives or armies. She found its weakness and let gravity do the rest. In 10 seconds, she had changed supply lines, impacted battles, and inspired generations. Her story, though mostly forgotten by the official record, reminds us of the power of courage, intellect, and audacity. It whispers a truth to all who listen. The world is not shaped solely by armies or machines. It is shaped by people brave enough to act when no one believes they can. And on the high mountains of the Werra, when the wind whistles through the cliffs, the faint sound of a goat's hoof on stone still echoes. Quiet reminder that one woman's courage can echo through history.